So next we are going to move on, and we're going to add in Thorsten. Thorsten's going to be joining us. Thorsten, welcome.
Welcome.
So, all right, he's going to be doing a live presentation. He is going to be talking about, and one of the things that I get a lot of questions on is, how do I go multi-account? All right, so I've got this working, but how do we go to multi-accounts? How do we go to multiple environments, I guess is another way to say that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to school us on that. And off you go.
Yeah, thanks. So as you said, I will talk about multi-account and multi-region. So how to deploy your CDK application to multiple environments. Because as we all know, some people have test environments, all have production environments. And we want to have test environments. So we definitely want to put them to different accounts, different regions, to reduce blast radius. So who am I? I talked about this earlier, but just for a recap. So I'm CEO and Cloud Evangelist at Timos, which is my own company. I'm an AWS Hero and CDK contributor. You can find me on Twitter. The Twitter handle will be in the lower right corner all the time, so you can find me all the time. So what do we want to do? So we will build a serverless API using AWS HTTP API gateway, but okay, it will already be there. This will be our starting point. And then we will deploy to different regions and to different AWS accounts, and even sprinkle in a little bit of testing in our pipeline. So how does this look like? This is our account setup. So we have our organization root. We have our organizational units like deployments, where we would have our CI/CD account, which is holding the pipeline. We have our workloads OU, which has our pre-production and production environments with our dev and prod. And Eric will love it. It's a serverless application. And we have our organization root account just for the sake of it. If you want to create these diagrams, I have written a tool called AWS Orchograph that's creating these diagrams for you. So let's dive into the code. So we have our, and it's the same all the time. Whoa, that's a little big. So we have our CDK application. As we all know, we have our app file. Our app file has this, implements our stack. Our stack then says, okay, please deploy into this account in this region. I'm a big fan of always specifying this, so I cannot accidentally put it somewhere else. And our serverless demo stack is then in the lib folder. In this case, I'm using a TypeScript application. So we have a new DynamoDB table, we have an HTTP API, and we have Lambda functions. I'm using the Node.js function construct here. So it's automatically wrapping and building the TypeScript stuff with parcel and all the things. So I'm adding a route for tasks with a post, and I'm adding a route for tasks with get. This doesn't matter really because it's just an application we already have. So this talk will be about spreading it into multiple accounts. So we have an application. What's important for now, because all I'm talking about is in developer preview and not DA yet. So lookups do not work currently in a fully supported manner. So we should not use VPC lookups, host its own lookups, but always things that are in our application. But everything else is perfectly fine. So standard thing would be, okay, let's do a CDK synthesize. And then we will get our template for exactly this little serverless application. And the demo gods will show if this works. Because yeah, it's spinning up Docker in the background, using parcel and creating all these things. So what we now want to do is add more libraries because we want to build a pipeline. So what we need to add here is the CDK Pipelines package. So there's a pipelines package that packages everything we need for the pipelines. It uses code pipelines, code build, and all these things. We just need code the pipelines package here. What we're then doing is we import all the things we need in our application file. So our only thing we will be hitting is our application file, because we will not change our application, because this is fine as it is, but change the deployment of it. So we're adding imports of the pipelines, the code pipeline, and the code pipeline actions. So next of it, we will create a new stack. And this will be our only stack that we deploy in our application. Everything else will be then be deployed by our pipeline. So we go ahead, create a new pipeline stack. And it is pipeline stack. With all the code pipelines, we need to define some artifacts. So we'll have source artifact and a cloud assembly artifact. The source artifact will hold the source code coming from GitHub in my case, and the cloud assembly artifact will then hold the synthesized CDK out folder. So, and the next thing we're doing is creating a CDK pipeline. I will first paste it in and then walk through line by line. So we're creating a new CDK pipeline from the pipelines package. We will give it a name, and we will provide the cloud assembly artifact that it should use between the stages. We have to define a source action. So where is the source code coming from? In this case, I'm saying, okay, it's a GitHub source action with all the things I need for this. So the owner and the repo and the branch. And then we define the auth token coming from secrets manager that's having our personal access token for GitHub. And it's outputting to our source artifact. And then instead of specifying all the steps manually, this CDK pipeline construct has something called a synth action, where we then add the simple synthesize action and using a standard npm synth, because we're using npm in this case. We're providing the source artifact and the cloud assembly artifact. So it knows where to find the sources and where to put the assembly. In my case, we're overriding the install command because we don't need only npm CI to get our package there, but in the Lambda folder, we have our Lambdas with their own package JSON, so we need an npm CI for this folder too. And as we might need Docker, I use a privileged container. So the moment we do this, we have our first pipeline defined. It's just a pipeline, it's not doing anything. It's just building everything, preparing everything, but not deploying anything. And for this to work, first of all, we need to remove this part. We're not deploying our application anymore using CDK directly, but we're now, instead of this, adding our pipeline stack to our application. So we have a new pipeline stack with everything we need. It's the same account, same region. It's just deploying the pipeline instead of our application. Our build finished, so we can see what happened before. So before it was just our template of our application. And in the next step, this will be different. So if we now would deploy this, I'm just going to the code. If we deploy this, it looks like this. So it deploys a pipeline, which has a source. It has a build phase. In this build phase, it spins up. It spins up a code build. And in this code build, it will do the CDK synthesize, and it will prepare all the assets. And in the next phase, it will start a code build project and self-update the pipeline. So whenever we change the pipeline, the first step will be deploying the pipeline stack. And if the pipeline stack changes, restarting the whole pipeline. So when we add new stages and change things to the assets, it will always self-mutate the pipeline and then deploy everything else. So now we need to create something called a stage. So up there, we are adding something, extending the stage. We're calling it app stage. And in this stage, we're now instantiating our serverless demo stack, which was our application before. So we just moved it into this stage, and that's all we need for this application to be there. And for our pipeline, we then add stages, which is just pipeline add application stage, and then we instantiate our stage, which has the pipeline as parent, a name, and an environment where to put this stage. So in this account, in this region, as you can see, one is in Frankfurt and one is in Dublin. That's why I named it differently, and it will prepend this to the stack name. So, and if we then deploy this, we get another setup. So if I go to code pipeline, we now have the source, the build, the update pipeline. Then there was there is a new code build project called assets, because it will then upload the assets to the S3 buckets in the desired accounts. So it is an extra step deploying all your assets. So in this case, the Lambda zip folder. And then it's deploying, creating the stage for my Frankfurt deployment, and it's using the native CloudFormation change set and execute change set actions in code pipeline. So I'm not paying some code build project to deploy some things in CloudFormation. And then it's the same for our Dublin account. So this is multi-region with just one line, and I can just put there more and more and more for more regions. It's just working. It will redeploy the pipeline and then redeploy your application. So now we want to add some tests. So in our app stage, we need to do some minor changes. So first of all, we're declaring some outputs here. And then we're just using these outputs here. So what I'm now doing, I'm creating new CFN outputs in my stack based on the table and the API, and put them into variables in my stage. That's everything. So now I have these outputs. First of all, I can see them in a concrete execution. So if I go to an execution and look at the deployment, I can see them as the output variables. But the even better part, I can now change a little bit. Namely, I will remove this and replace it with something similar. So it just extracted the app stage to a new variable to be able to then do some interesting things here. Because now for this stage, it was just creating a change set and deploying the change set. It's now adding a new action called a shell script action. And this shell script action has a name, as everything in code pipeline, and it has commands. And these commands will be executed using this code build project. And I can use environment variables, in this case URL. And with specifying use outputs, I can populate these environment variables as stack outputs. So what's happening here is that the API output I defined in my stage will be put into the environment variable for this code build task. to validate or run these commands. So if I go back to my pipeline, so I added this to the Dublin pipeline, there's a new action here called validate dev Dublin, and it's a code build. And if I go to details, I can see the build log. And the build log now says, okay, I'm doing a curl somewhere, and this curl is going to this API, and it's doing stuff, and it's doing things, and it's certifying because I'm using curl verbose, and it has my output. So everything's working. And I can do some tests here, and if everything's fine, I transition to the next stage. Otherwise, I block the stage and the run. So I can do automated testing of these deployments. And now comes the hard part. I wanted to put it into another account. And for this really hard thing to be possible, I add another stage and specify a different account ID. And that's it. Because it's nearly it. So it's everything I need to do for this stage. What I had to do beforehand, so it's always the secret magic, I had to bootstrap my accounts using the new CDK bootstrapping experience. It's documented on the pipelines package. And for this to be allowed, I had to specify in my second account that it should trust my CI/CD account. And that's why you definitely should go to this reference architecture, having a CI/CD account and then multiple stage accounts. And each of these stage accounts will then trust your CI/CD account. So everything running in your CI/CD account, especially the code pipeline, is allowed to assume the CDK roles in your target accounts and deploy things there. So that's everything you need to do for the multi-account stuff. It's just adding it here. And then in code pipeline, it looks like, okay, there's a new stage. In this case, I decided, just to show that it's possible, to add multiple stage environments in one stage. So not one prod Frankfurt, prod Dublin, but in one. However you like it, you could even put it in parallel to speed up the deployment into multiple production environments. So the really interesting thing is to bootstrap your account or your accounts correctly using the new bootstrap experience and the trust relationship to your CI/CD account, and then the rest just works. So for that part for the production. So there are blog posts. So if you look at the AWS CDK, I can show you one thing where you can find more of these. And so it's in the packages. And then there is this pipelines. I cannot emphasize it enough. It's developer preview. So be aware. I would not say don't use it in production because I'm using it in production, but you should not do it. And there is everything laid out again. And the things you need to, when provisioning your accounts. So bootstrapping the accounts is really important that you do this with a new experience and across account trust. And then everything just works because the new bootstrapping experience will deploy IAM roles with given names that can be determined by other accounts because they follow a specific schema. And then they can be assumed across accounts and then deployed using code pipeline. Important thing to notice, there is in code pipeline, there's this details button to go directly to the code build project or the CloudFormation deployment. This does not work for cross-account deployments because it's a deep link on the web console and it's now deep linking into CloudFormation in the CI/CD account and not inside the target account. So this is something that's not working. You have to switch to your target account and go to CloudFormation there So it's not something you do wrong, it's just not working like this. So let's see what's happening in behind the scenes. So there are many stacks deployed here. So first of all, in your CI/CD account, in this case, Essential, because that's where I deployed my account, there's a pipeline stack being deployed. It then deploys my dev Frankfurt and my prod Frankfurt in the dev and prod account in the same region. It also deploys the Dublin stacks in the Dublin region. And for this to be possible, under the hood, you don't see it, but it just is there. It deploys a support stack in the CI/CD account in your other regions. So in all regions where you deploy your application, there will be a support stack. And because it needs to create a new bucket for the assets for this region, because for Lambda, for example, assets have to be in the same region, and it sets up bucket replication so that all assets are in all regions for the deployment to be there. It's the same for the CloudFormation templates and so on. So this is definitely something you should know that is happening, but you don't have to worry about it. What you might need to worry about if this is just for testing, for this to work, so everything is encrypted by default. So all the buckets are encrypted with CDK bootstrapping. And because you need cross-account access, encryption only works with customer-managed customer master keys and not with AWS-managed customer master keys. And because of these CMC in the case, you have to have your own keys, and they cost $1 a month, I think, per bootstrapped region and account. So this is something you have to keep in mind. It doesn't matter for, I think enterprise setups or some setups where you deploy real workloads, but if you do it just for fun, maybe not deploy to 22 regions. So that's it for the stacks that are deployed. One very important thing is, if you change something to the pipeline, or if you create the pipeline the first time, and for the first time for the bootstrapping, you have to do it using CDK deploy. And further on, you should not use CDK deploy, but using the pipeline itself to self-mutate. It's very important to push your actual code to your repo, and then if you then put it once to the repo, then you can do your manual deployment, because the pipeline will start immediately when it's created. It will check out the current state of the repository and self-mutate to whatever is in the repo. So you should make sure that the current state is in the repo before you do a local deployment. So that's it for my presentation. I think we can do a short Q&A after this. So definitely visit the AWS CDK GitHub and give your feedback on all these pipeline features, because they're still under active development. There's room for comments and things that can be done. I've written a blog post for creating a CI/CD pipeline for your CDK app. You can find it on my webpage, timers.de/blog, or on dev, on the Heroes, AWS Heroes group. Little self-plug, I provide coaching for CDK. And you can find all my GitHub things with all the CDK demos and this org graph and some tooling I'm writing under my GitHub/timers. So that's it. And open for questions.
All right. Hey, sorry, Matt, I jumped first. I got it. Hey, Thorsten, Thorsten, there's a couple of questions real quick, and I thought I might throw it here. So each account gets a customer managed KMS key. Is that correct?
Each account and each region that you bootstrap with the new bootstrap experience gets a customer managed customer master key. So CMCMK.
Alrighty.
This is needed for cross-account deployments. If you don't need cross-account deployments, okay, then you're not in my talk right now. But that if you don't need cross-account deployments, there is a current pull request open to disable custom managed custom master keys to remove the cost. But it's $1 per account, so you definitely have $1 per account and region.
Alrighty. We have another question from Brian. What are the gotchas, pain points for dev iterations for defining the pipelines?
So for the development of the pipeline itself, yeah, it takes a little while because you always have to put it into GitHub and then it goes through the pipeline self-mutation and so on. There's another open pull request for this to stop self-mutation for development purposes and then doing CDK deploy for every change manually. And say, okay, I'm just updating the pipeline whenever I like it. And if I'm fine with it, then I do another deploy that's reactivating self-mutation and go back to production mode.
All right, excellent. So one other one we have in here is, so the CDK role, is it something that you'd have to set up front?
You just have to do the CDK bootstrapping. And if it's not the right version of bootstrapping, it will tell you, please update to the latest version of bootstrapping. And with the latest bootstrap version, it will create cross-account roles for deployment, for asset uploads, for repo pulling. So I think it's 3 or 4 IAM roles per account and region. And they have a specific pattern like CDK, some kind of random string, but it's not, so it's a random looking string, but it's the same for all accounts and the account ID and the region. So CDK knows how the role in all the other accounts is called.
All right, excellent. That's all the questions I'm seeing. Matt, do you see any others?
Yeah, we had a couple over from Slack. So, Thorsten, would you have any recommendations about how to best, especially within the case of these pipelines, divide up stacks? Does everything go in one stack? Should you have different stacks? How would you approach it?
So, to keep it simple in the beginning, I would start with one stack per environment, because having multiple stacks for different environments is crazy enough for the beginning. And if you see some things where you might hit limits, which is especially in the serverless case, might happen fast. If you build one Lambda per endpoint for an API gateway, for example, and you have a role and all these things coming up, you might hit the 200 resources limit pretty fast. So then that's where I start to break it down into more stacks, like, okay, this part of the service is going to one stack. And so one is for the API, then one is for this part of the Lambdas, one is for this part of the Lambdas, and so on. But this is something that could be done inside your application stack. So you can have one stack for your real application and do everything inside this application. So in your stage, you can for a long time, you can stick to one stack here, or at least one construct here.
Gotcha. And any advice for anyone who's looking to adopt pipelines, either rough edges or, gotchas that stuck you up originally that you would just recommend that they watch out for?
So one thing that's definitely, just as I said, not yet supported is lookups. So the moment you use context lookups like VPC lookups, hosted zone lookups, things like that, they're currently not working in all cases. So there is a way, if you do the lookup once locally, and the context JSON is there, it will use this context JSON instead of doing the lookup. So it works in some cases, but it's definitely a rough edge. And this is something that's being targeted for the GA that is working then.
Okay, so would a developer then be responsible for running those lookups locally and then committing that CDK context JSON file into
that? That would be a way for the time being, or just try to avoid these lookups. So that's why I demoed a serverless application, because then I don't need VPCs, and that's the main lookups I'm doing. Everything else could be done in the stack.
I would like to just say, you're welcome.
And if you deploy VPCs, you don't care about the KMS key cost because you have NAT gateway.
All right.
Indeed, it saves you a lot of money there. Yeah. Well, good deal. Well, thank you very much, Thorsten. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right.